For as long as I can remember, I always wanted to be a grandpa. That was the only sure thing I knew I wanted. I had other goals, career aspirations, and the like, but the end goal, the final level to complete, the final boss to beat, would be ending up an old man with a few grandkids who I could make fart noises at and give them quarters if those still existed by the time I got there. I never put together until 2017 that all my seemingly unrelated ambitions centered around earning my members-only jacket and unironically using the phrase, "beautiful day for a walk." And the reason for that was because I did in fact grow up with the world's greatest grandpa. His annual coffee mug told no lies. And of course, everyone's grandpa was the best grandpa. I get it, unless your grandpa was like Stalin or something. And even then, I bet Stalin was a great grandpa and did great with the disappearing thumb trick. But that's the best part about being a grandpa. Even if you caused mass genocide, there's still a few young kids who don't know anything about that except your mustache curls are the best thing in the world. Grandpas have to work to do wrong and are rarely blamed for anything. It's the most esteemed position a man can be in during his remaining time on this big ball of wax. What happened in 2017 that awakened me came about a week after Thanksgiving when I got a phone call from my cousin Chelsea. I knew something was wrong because she was calling me. And in this day and age, if someone you know calls you, then you pretty much have to always assume someone has died. In this particular case, someone had. My grandpa. My cousin Chelsea had gone to his house to drop off some groceries and found him lying on the floor of his room and he had no pulse. She was shaken, didn't know what to do, so she called me. I was at my daughter's dance class and I didn't know what to do, but I could feel my throat drop to the floor. I told her to call my mom until she answered and then call the police and that I was on my way. I grabbed my daughter mid-time step and started flying down the freeway. My grandpa dying was never an option to me. I didn't think he was capable of it. At this point, I just thought he and the Grim Reaper were drinking buddies who watched the news together and talked for hours about the great steaks they had eaten over the years. Walking into that house and not being greeted by an old man with a giant smile, which he always used his entire face to create, was a vision I could not process. But for the first time in my life, it was going to happen. By the time I arrived, my mom was already there and in tears. She was his only daughter by blood and had been helping take care of him the last few years with the normal day-to-day tasks that become a little more difficult with age, like bathing, or finding the remote, or finding the bathtub, or finding. My cousin Chelsea and her brother were both there. Of course, I was there trying to act like I had something to contribute, and a few other neighbors stopped by to check in when they saw the ambulance in the driveway. We just walked around the house, crying, hugging, and trying to make little jokes here and there to lighten the mood while we waited for the coroners to come and move him. Although none of us thought this day would come, it wasn't a surprise. He was 94 years old. And as my grandpa used to say, anything past 80 and you're just cheating the devil or pissing off God. He wasn't religious. We didn't know anything was wrong, and he would have never told us if there was anyway, because when you're a grandpa, you don't have to tell people shit. After a couple of days, we were able to put some thoughts into plans and started working on the funeral. Grandpa wanted to be cremated, and he was a veteran of World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, so he got the full military burial. But the minor details still needed to be worked out. And that's when my mom informed me that I and I alone would be speaking at the funeral. Why me, I asked. Because he would have wanted it that way, my mom replied. Of course, I had no way to know if this was true, and I'm guessing my mom was banking on that. Also, it made sense to my mom that I give the eulogy because I make my living as a writer and at times a comedian, so I'm not afraid to talk at people. But this was different. This was a funeral. Also, I'm not exactly a clean stand-up comedian and rely a lot on crowd work during my sets. Did my mom want me to start things off by saying, "How's everyone doing tonight?" and then shit all over my uncle in the front row for wearing a brown pants and black jacket? Where's all the ladies tonight? Who hates airplane food? To be clear, I don't do any of those bits. In fact, there are very few stand-up comedians who do those bits, but it is what the average person thinks a stand-up comedian does. It's almost certainly what my mom thought I did, and I bet she even thought that at some point I'd pull out a puppet. My mom had never seen me do stand-up, and this was by design. As a card-carrying member of the Pentecostal church, she would never be okay with just about anything I said, even if I was holding a puppet. It was better this way, and we both knew it, which is why she's also never asked to come see me perform. That is, until the eulogy. The most important speech I would ever give, next to the time I argued on her behalf at an HOA meeting about parking. My mom said, "Just tell some jokes from your skit." "I'm sure you have something that might work. Make up a joke about old people or something. Lighten the mood." Now, when I started doing stand-up, I did one-liners. I would just write one-liners. And I did actually have a one-liner about old people. And it went something like this. Every time I see an old couple walking through the park or holding hands or doing something adorable like that, I always think to myself, oh my God, one day soon one of them is going to be so sad. Now, I couldn't really pull that one out, could I? Sure, it was topical, but it wouldn't play. My mom was not amused. She asked me to think of something else. And so I told her that there was another bit I was working on about something that happened between my mom, Grandpa, and I. I said, remember that one time we picked up Grandpa for lunch, and when we got to his house, he was dressed in sweatpants, slippers with socks, and a button-up shirt and a corduroy blazer. The shirt was tucked in. In fact, it seemed more and more like he was just wearing the clothes that were closest to him. And he was drinking an awful lot. Yes, my mom said. Then you told me that something was wrong with Grandpa since Grandma died, and we should try to help him. I remember that, my mom replied. Well, my bit talks about how wrong your thinking is. Nothing was wrong with Grandpa. He was doing whatever he wanted, and it was great. He wore tank tops and suit pants, different socks, watched the news all day. He was living his dream. Like, I look at him and think to myself, that would be awesome. I hope my wife dies before me. I mean, just think about the technology that we have now. My grandpa watched Fox News and the History Channel all day because that's all he knew. But me, my generation, if my wife dies before me, just think about all the shows that I can catch up on. I mean, Netflix, Hulu, HBO, Amazon, there are so many shows sitting on our queue that are only 2 episodes deep. I could get to all of them. Handmaid's Tale, Moon Boy, Mosaic, Barry, The Deuce, Kimmy Schmidt, The Americans, Veep, Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. There are so many shows. I hope the day never comes when someone walks in on me wearing sweatpants, no shirt, holding a bowl of Coors Light, finally able to finish Game of Thrones for the first time and says, I think something's wrong with Grandpa. Grandpa's great! My mom just stared at me. Don't do that. I was lost. I sat down to write, and the first thing that came out was, I can't believe he's not here. A sad sentence for sure, but a completely hacky one. Was I writing a greeting card? I can't believe he's not here. Are you kidding me? It was definitely the thought that kept playing over and over again in my head, but anyone at any time could have said the same thing and gotten the same reaction. I wasn't going to play to the blue hairs. But the more and more I sat there staring at a wall, the puppet idea started looking better and better. How was I supposed to encapsulate someone's entire life, especially when that person died at 94 and I was only given 6 minutes to speak? That just doesn't seem fair. The more I tried to come up with things, I wrote these vague details that didn't mean anything to me, and I was sure as shit wouldn't mean anything to my grandpa. He was a veteran, sure. He was married to 2 wonderful women. One was my mom's mom, who died years before I was born. The other one was a woman named Ruby, who I would always call my grandma. His favorite candy was peanut brittle, which tastes fucking awful. His favorite liquor was something called Harvey's Bristol Cream, also fucking awful. His favorite music ranged from big band to jazz to swing. His favorite song was a Tommy Dorsey standard called What Are You Doing for the Rest of Your Life, which he played every Sunday morning. He was a Norman Rockwell painting come to life. Did I really not know anything else about my grandpa? Was this it? The man I had grown up idolizing because he was the man in my life? The dad for so many of us who didn't really have one? The man who was always there, and I can't believe he's not here. Ah, shit, there I go again. The few parts of my grandpa's life that I did know intimately mainly ended with him giving me $20. A few of you got that. That's great. I thought I could maybe talk to a few of his friends to get more information, but as my grandpa used to say when I would go visit him in his last few years, everyone I know is dead. He wasn't wrong. He had only 1 or 2 friends left, but they had only known him for less time than I had, and they probably couldn't believe he wasn't here either. We planned the service for a few days after Christmas. We figured most people would already be in town for the holidays and no one would have to make extra travel plans. My grandpa would have liked that. I left my page blank for past the first sentence and hoped that over the holidays I could gain some more insight, perhaps uncover a secret family or at least something juicy I could quietly whisper around the funeral so by the time I was eulogizing, no one was listening to me, just thinking about the guy Grandpa had murdered or whatever it was. Christmas Eve came and I was nowhere near closer to a finished product. One of my favorite memories of my grandpa was going over to his and my grandma's house every Christmas Eve. It was one of my favorite holiday traditions, and as the family got bigger and bigger, it became one of the more chaotic ones. My Irish family was never shy about having as many kids as possible, and it got to the point where I didn't know who was who. One year, I was talking to my grandpa, and a baby walked up to us. I asked my grandpa, "Hey, Grandpa, who's that?" And he said, "I don't know." He didn't know. When I was a kid, he and my grandma would have huge, large trash bags full of presents for each grandkid. When great-grandkids started showing up at a pace that appeared like our family might be preparing to repopulate the earth after the apocalypse, the trash bags we all received evolved into just one present per person. The last year we all got together, it was a raffle. We all got one ticket. And most of us just walked away with stuff my grandparents didn't want or free movie tickets. My wife got one of those little sheep toys that poops gum, and we honestly couldn't tell if she technically won or lost the raffle. After my grandma Ruby passed, 5 years before my grandpa would, the family kind of split up. Most of us didn't see each other anymore. My mom was the only child from my grandpa's first marriage, and he took on 4 stepchildren when he remarried to Grandma Ruby. However, after my grandpa died, a few of us from both sides of the family made it a point to spend Christmas Eve together. My cousin Chelsea, her brother and father, and of course my wife, daughter, and mom all sat around eating pie and drinking Harvey's Bristol cream. We told stories about Grandpa, like how he got drunk and jumped into the pool fully clothed during the 4th of July, how he used to walk around the table at Thanksgiving or Christmas Eve and yell at us to eat, how I'd hear a jazz song and quiz me on who was playing drums or sax, and of course I didn't know, or how I used to look at a plate of food and just say, "Gorgeous." Then a reoccurring sentiment kept coming up. He somehow knew everyone and was somehow always able to get things done and make things happen. The more we talked about it, the more it seemed like he might have been in the mafia. The chances of that were very slim, but everyone was just always so nice to him and he always knew how to handle it. One time, he walked my mom and some cousins into a trade show of sorts, and at every other table, someone would walk over and hand my grandpa and everyone with him a free item. They walked out with gold watches, clothes, tickets to the theater, theme parks. I don't remember him ever paying for a dinner, my cousin Chelsea said. Back in 1999, I was hired as a performer at SeaWorld. Grandpa told me that if I ever ran into a guy named Bill Davis to say hi. A few months later, I heard that Bill Davis was in the next office, so I decided to poke my head in and say hello like my grandpa had told me to do. At the time, Bill Davis was in a meeting, and I also didn't know that he was the president of SeaWorld. When I told him my grandpa, Jim McKeon, told me to say hello, Bill Davis stopped his meeting, walked over to me, and said, "Jim McKeon saved my life. You ever need anything, you come to me." No explanation, no backstory, just endless gratitude and loyalty. Again, I don't think he was in the mafia, as I don't recall many gangsters frequenting the Olive Garden for free breadsticks. My mom said he was just genuine and cared for everyone around him at all times. He didn't care about your race, religion, or your smell. If you were a good person, that's all that mattered. If you took care of your family, that's all that mattered, and everyone was family. Could it really be that simple, that being a good person who went out of their way to do good for others could get you free stuff and an endless amount of kind gestures and friendships? Mafia. After a few drinks of Harvey's Bristol cream, my mom pulled out a photo album, and I was excited. Here comes the secret family. She showed me a picture of my grandpa with a bunch of other military folks. Up until this point in my life, I'd only seen one photo of my grandpa in uniform. He never liked to talk about it, my mom said. This was him right before Pearl Harbor. Grandpa wasn't at Pearl Harbor, Mom. My mom replied, He was in a sub on the bottom of the ocean floor, and they were ordered to stay put, not engaged, since they didn't know if the Japanese had subs in the water and they'd be needed. He never talked about it because he didn't think he deserved any awards for sitting there. She then went on to tell us that while in the Navy during World War II, he became an official for the Armed Services Basketball League and an umpire for the Baseball League, which featured drafted Hall of Famers like Bob Feller and Hank Greenberg. I saw pictures of my mom as a little girl, my grandpa as a young man, and a life I was never aware of. My mom gave me the photo album. I gave a short toast to his memory, and I went home excited that I finally had something to extend his eulogy past one sentence. The morning of the service, I was a complete mess. I kept writing and rewriting, throwing balls of paper against a wall like I was in a bad Nora Ephron movie. I wanted to get it right. I wanted to say all the things that mattered, all the things that would have mattered to my grandpa. For decades, I had only known him as the man who always looked much older than me, who every single person I knew adored. And for this adoration, there seemed to be no explanation save for his overwhelming charm and desire to see good in everyone. I only knew him as this man that commanded respect without ever asking for it, a man who was an example and loved boxed wine. I only knew him as the glue that held us all together. In the past few weeks, I'd learned that he meant something to everyone he met. I only wish that he hadn't outlived all those people so they might be able to give him one last send-off. I had started this task looking for any kind of information that explained why my grandpa was so loved, even going so far as to assume it must have been because he was a crime boss. But no, he accomplished so much and was surrounded by so much happiness simply by always trying to be the best person he possibly could be. And it made me sad that that answer didn't make sense to me. For as long as I can remember, I always wanted to be my grandpa, and I can't believe he's not here. Thanks.